93% of challenges in companies and organizations stem from onboarding, and 99% of those, I was reading the wrong notes. Hold on, let me get the stats. I got to give you the stats right. 94% of challenges in organizations, in organizational culture, stem from the onboarding process. And that is according to a study that I just made up, although the number is probably pretty close. My mom would always say to me, whatever starts out right, and you know the end of this, and if you don't, you could probably hear your mom's voice in it. Whatever starts out right ends up right. But she didn't tell me about the messy middle. She didn't tell me about the middle part of the improvement, of the honoring, of the protecting, of all those aspects in the middle that you have to get. If you started out right, then it ends up right. Well, what I found in building a company is roughly 94% of the challenges that I ran into had to do with my onboarding process. And the onboarding process had to do with communication. And if I didn't communicate well to the people who came onto the company, then I would be dealing with so many challenges that I would get angry at as a leader. And I'd be like, why is this happening in our culture? And then I'd have to look back at it and say, well, that's happening in our culture because of the onboarding process. And the onboarding process broke down to the effective communication that I had or didn't have. And see, today is a reminder to all of us leaders that get frustrated at the challenges in our cultures to turn to the onboarding communication, honoring of systems, and the small daily improvements that will come from listing off the screw-ups and celebrating them at the highest level. This will give people a feeling of empowerment. It will spark innovation and encourage a spirit of adaptability. So why don't we get this party started?
Nothing more on my mind. I got to shine, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never know, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
The onboarding process. I want to onboard every single one of you and welcome you to The Vibe. My name is Kelly Cardenas, and we have 3 different shows on this particular podcast. We have a show where I interview some of the most iconic people in the world. They give advice to my kids by name because I never wanted my kids to ever worship idols. I just wanted to be inspired by iconic people. And so we also have a show called You Have to Meet My Friends, where I go live and I call my friends randomly. And they don't know they're on the podcast till they're on the podcast. And then we have today, which is Inchstones. So we take, principle-based wisdom and we see how it can apply to today. And this is the application part is probably one of the toughest. And we were talking about it in our men's group this week, which was yesterday here in Carlsbad. If you ever get the chance, it's 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. on every Tuesday. And if you want to come, it's unbelievable. But we were talking about the application because there are things that we talk about in life that we have theories on, but a lot of times we don't apply those theories. If we apply just 1/10 or 1/100th of the theories that we read about in our daily lives, you know what? Everything would be all right. And one of my friends told me, his name is Craig, he said, every book that I've ever read is right if you actually apply it. And it made me think. And so today we're just talking about onboarding. It's just about onboarding because what my pops used to always say to me is 99% of the challenges in organizations comes down to communication. And then I started to dig into that part, and it was like, and the communication, let's go even deeper, the communication, especially in the onboarding, because my mom would say whatever starts out right ends up right, but she wouldn't, again, tell me about the middle part of it, that you have to honor things, right? You have to honor that. You have to look to improve it, and then you have to guard it at the highest level. And this is what happens in cultures, right? Because I noticed this, in the hair industry. We did a small little thing, just a very, very little thing. But what I found was the little things and the details inside of your business are the things that people start to feel safe when it happens. And not only your employees and your team members first, that's where we focus, but also it creates that kind of trust and safety in the person experiencing or consuming what it is that you're selling. So with us in the professional beauty industry, we used to do a very simple thing. When we walked in the back door, we always wanted to seem like the floor or where the service was happening and people, the guests saw. We always wanted to make sure that that almost was a stage, right? I got this from Disney. That, when you go to Disneyland, you don't have, people walking around. You don't see the trash being taken out. They take the trash very discreetly. They sweep up the street very discreetly, and then they have exits that you don't even see them come in and out of. And so we wanted to do this and implement this because I thought Disney was a very reputable place. But I noticed it at the Four Seasons too. In the hospitality industry, the high levels of hospitality, it's just the details that they're utilizing that change everything. So what we did is we did this little thing where we would have people, when they walked into the back room and out of the back room, it was one at a time. It was never two at a time. You never swung the door open and then walked through. It was always you open it enough for your body to make it through, and then you close it right behind you as quickly as possible. And even if somebody was waiting to walk out, you still open, close, and then you open, close. That way the guest never experiences the back room, so they're not looking at those things. These are just minor little tiny details. But that has to be communicated in the onboarding process, and not only in the onboarding process, but also for people to look and say, how can we make that better? Number one, we got to honor it. Number two, how can we make it better? And number three, how can we guard it as we go along? And so these kind of things, are massive. And with my mom, right, when she said, what starts out right ends up right. Watch this. What starts out right and is honored, improved, and communicated, and then guarded will end up right. So she told me the beginning, told me the end, but didn't tell me the middle. So I wanted to share with you the middle. Today, it's a reminder to all of us, like as all of us leaders that get frustrated. I don't know any leader that hasn't been frustrated at some point, is just to make sure that when we communicate in the onboarding process, 94% or somewhere around there, 94% of the challenges in our culture will be solved in the onboarding process. And so we're going to look and we're going to dive deep into that today and look at it and see how that can, in the onboarding process. And then when people make mistakes, then we celebrate those mistakes. We make those things better. They become, our rules are nothing more than a list of our screw ups. And then what it does is it gives people a feeling of empowerment. It sparks innovation and encourages a spirit of adaptability inside of your culture, right? So first off is your systems that are a list of your screw-ups, we just talked about that, mean nothing if they're not communicated in the onboarding process. And they have to be communicated at the highest level. So we had a girl named Eli that was unbelievable, phenomenal performer in our Chicago location. She, on her day off, she wanted to improve something in the back room because she said that when she walked in every day, she wanted to feel a little bit better. So she took everything out, she cleaned it, which was awesome. Thank you, Eli. And then she actually painted the back room, one of the walls yellow. And when I asked her why, she said, because it made me happy. So what we did in the company is I started to notice that people were happier when they walked in. So we actually took and just made a yellow wall in every single location. And that yellow wall was honored. Like we made the initials EW, that was Eli Winters. And we just put that on the wall so people knew. And so in the onboarding process, we wanted to communicate that here's our systems. They're nothing more than a list of our screw ups. So we want to invite you to screw up. We want to give you the freedom to screw up as long as you write it down. But we also want you to improve things. And this was an example of it. And we showed them the wall. And then that way in the onboarding process, the person understood and knew that we wanted to start it out right. But what was right to us was just a list of the screw ups. So it wasn't like we're coming down on you with rules and regulations that have no story behind them and have no relationship behind it. So make sure that your systems that are nothing more than a list of your screw ups are communicated in your onboarding process. And as we move through is teaching people how to learn that is signature to your culture is imperative. And this was a big thing because I used to think, oh, well, everybody learns exactly the same. Well, anything that you allow to take its own course will grow the way that it wants to, as opposed to the way that you want to. So if you're not intentional with your systems, with your culture, and exactly the way that you want people to learn inside your organization, let me give you an example. In our environments, we always wanted to be able to make sure that people knew to make as many mistakes as possible, take risks, because we would, if they worked, we would write them down, systemize them, and make them the new rule that you could talk about. If they sucked, then you would write them down and say, maybe this is a new rule of something that you shouldn't do. And so we wanted people to know how it was that we learned. It wasn't just by the book. We wanted to learn by the book, but it was by experience. And also we communicated that a lot of the learning had to do with watching and seeing and becoming aware of the culture and becoming aware of the environment. This was probably one of the best examples of it. There was a girl named Lacey. She was phenomenal, probably one of the best hairdressers I've ever seen in my life. And I was cutting, and I wondered why she was doing this, but Lacey identified a blind spot for the client in the mirror. There was mirrors all around the salon, but she identified a place where the guest couldn't see. She was watching me cut, and as I went up the side of the head, I actually clipped my finger with my scissors, which is probably one of the worst things that happen. But if you're a hairdresser, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, you know, you're about to cut yourself. You're like, I'm just about to cut myself. And then you're like, it's just about to happen. I'm about to close the scissors, and then bam, you do it. And then you're surprised that you did it. This is only hairdresser. So if you're not one, that's what happens. And I cut myself, and I cut myself pretty good. And I started to bleed, but the guest couldn't see it. And I dropped my hand down. Well, Lacey, as soon as she saw me cut myself, she released to the back room. She came back. She had already had the Band-Aid out and unwrapped. She waited till I got to the blind spot where the guest was, and I dropped my hand down. She wrapped the Band-Aid on. I lifted my hand back up, and the guest had no idea what had happened. So she identified things, she looked at things, and what we called was we wanted to have an ownership mentality. We wanted to have an eagle eye. We wanted to have one eye on the environment, one eye on the guest, right? So as we walked through, this was a kind of way, but this in the onboarding process, when I onboarded Lacey, I took a day and I walked her through every single aspect, from the mentality to the heart part of it to the actual actions. But those things had to be communicated. So make sure that when you're teaching people how to learn that is signature to your culture, that's imperative in your onboarding process. Okay, so next is we need to have concrete examples of success communicated in the onboarding process and periodically throughout the journey. This is key when it comes to morale. Let me break this down. Like in the onboarding process, you need to give it. And it's not that you pound your chest and say, we're the greatest company in the world and all these things, but you want to give concrete stories of success that has actually happened. So you want to give that because that will give a situation for a person to be able to see themselves in that. They start to say, wow, this could be me. This could be amazing for me to be able to transfer through this company. And when you do that, It's not only in the onboarding process, but it's throughout the journey. And then guess what happens? In the middle of the journey, you start to use their story in the onboarding process. And when that happens, now it becomes personal. The culture becomes personal. And as opposed to telling someone else's story when they talk about the company, the brand, or the culture, they're actually telling their own inside of it that is wrapped in the brand. And that's when the ownership mentality actually happens. This is how you create evangelical people. And when I say evangelical, it's not religious. It's that people that preach the gospel, they evangelize the gospel of your brand. This is ultimately what we want. This is the reason why we market, why we spray and pray, why we market to 1 million people so we get a couple. I tell you, when you have an evangelist of your brand that will speak the gospel of it, that's the tipping point, right? So let's move on. And it's common pitfalls told with relatable, true stories in the onboarding process will create a relationship with your systems. So common pitfalls, letting people know, like in the event that you utilize our system inside our culture and you do this thing has happened so many times, and that's the reason why we stay away from it. But it has to have a relatable, true story. And so I would connect people with those things, right? Say, for instance, myself, I made a huge mistake one time and with the music in our location, and our music went out, and it was back in the day when we had I think it was a Airport Express. That's how long ago it was. And we had a CD changer in the back and all that stuff. And our CD changer went out. It's a 6-disc CD changer. It was nice. And, you guys are going to judge me for that. But that's when we started our location. We had this music, we had this playlist, whatever. And the CD changer went out. Well, the only thing that I knew to do was turn on Apple Music. And there was like radio stations. They weren't as good as they are now. But there was a radio station. I was like, well, I'll just turn on a Christian radio station. No one can be offended by that. And although some people could. And I walked over and a lady was like, oh my gosh, this is my son and my song. And I was like, oh, cool. I chose the right station. And then I came back and like 5 minutes later, she was just bawling uncontrollably. And I came up to her and I was like, oh, wow. And, I asked her, I said, oh, I thought you were just celebrating the song that, you and your son's song. And she's like, he passed away yesterday. Well, see, what I did is I evoked an emotion by a song, and I connected a song to that side because I thought that, hey, this will happen. And if they can connect to it. But so I learned a lesson. And so when we would onboard our people, we would let them know the type of music that we play in our locations are non-lyrical, foreign, or not popular at all, because we don't want to evoke any emotion, positive or negative. We only want them to have an emotion based off the service that they get within our place. And so when I let them know of my mistake that I had made, and then I let them know of the system that we have as far as the music, then we didn't have any pushback. Well, I need to play country. I need to play hip hop. It's not about you in your culture. It's about the customer and how they feel. And so making sure. But there was a story behind it. Does that make sense? So common pitfalls told with relatable, true stories in the onboarding process will create a relationship with your systems. And so let's move on a little bit. Is not only the origin story of the company, but of the individuals who have had triumphs, and most importantly, the stories of impact on the community you serve, told in the onboarding process, will light the people on fire. Remember, though, fire needs heat, fuel, and oxygen to be sustained. Now, let me break this part down. Is not only the origin story of the company, and this happens a lot. People tell the origin story of, say, Nike or whatever it is. It doesn't mean anything till it becomes personal. So you got to tell the origin story, but you also got to tell the origin story and when it relates to the people that are inside of your culture. And so when you do that, and you have this, it creates such a personal side. And then people are inspired by these people and they're thinking, what if I could become that? Well, then you start to add their stories into it. Small little triumphs, little Inchstones, if you will, of triumph inside of your culture. And you do that in the onboarding process. And now when the person overhears you doing the onboarding and it has their story in it, they solidify to the brand even more. So when I say about the impact of the community that you serve, it's the community that you serve is not just the community that you live in. It's the people who consume your product or your service. And so when we talk about those things, how it can impact. And so I had a woman one time, she came in, she was like, she got up and she said, "You saved my life." And I was like, I was working at the Mandalay Bay. I didn't know what she was talking about. I thought, I said, "Thank you." I guess complimented before, but I said, "Thank you." And then she got really close. She's like, "No, you saved my life." And I was like, "Okay, cool. It's getting a little weird. You're a little close." That's not what I said, but I felt it. And then I backed off and then she came even closer. She pulled me in almost like she was going to hug me. And she looked at me in my eyes, like in my soul. She was like, "You saved my life." And at that point, I said, "Tell me more." So she told me 2 weeks ago, my father committed suicide. And then my brother got so depressed that, yesterday he did. And she said, today, when I came in, I was coming in to get my hair done. So I looked uh, good for when I actually took my own life when I got home from this appointment. But because of the way that I felt in this place, I actually chose to not take my life and I want to live. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is amazing. So in the onboarding process, when I brought people on, I'm getting goosebumps when I tell it right now. When I brought them on, then I let them know of the impact that our attitudes, the way that we treat them, the way that we connect with the guest, and the way that we connect with each other as far as a team means the world, and it can actually save people's lives. And this is how it happened in true concrete story, and this is how it impacts. And so that would light people on fire. And then as the stories came in, we would invite the stories and we want to know the stories, and we would let the people know the way that we want to learn as a culture is through your story. And that's all we want. We want a story of your success. Bring it to us. Let us know about it. If you screw up, we want the story too. Don't hide it, because it'll become the next rule and regulation. It'll become that thing and it'll be honored in your name. And so, with the fire part of it, the fire needs heat, fuel, and oxygen. And think of that. Like, what produces heat or friction inside of your company? It's trying things, trying new things. What is the fuel? The fuel is the people, right? And the fuel is sometimes the results. And what's the oxygen? What breathes life into your environment? These three elements have to happen. It's the fire triangle when you look it up. It's heat, it's fuel, and it's oxygen. You take one of those away, the fire is not there anymore. And make sure that you understand that when you're dealing with people. And so the story of your culture in the onboarding process must be compelling, clear, and create a desire to not only uphold, but to grow and have it become their story. See, I think a lot of times in the onboarding process, people go through and they're like, okay, this was our company, but I tell you, like, when you have a compelling story, right? And so when we would do it, I would let people know, hey, I just want to let you know that, number one, I came from the greatest company, a Robert Cromie salon in the whole professional beauty industry. I was the most sought after company to work for in the professional beauty industry when I worked there. When we started this company, I wanted to take my education. I want to honor Robert Cromie's and Margaret Cromie's at the highest level for the education and experience that they gave me. And what we want to do is we want to create the highest paid hairdressers in the industry, because we want hairdressers to be able to have the greatest lives so they can give the greatest experiences. And this is the first brick and mortar business in the history of my family. And my dad and I sat out in front of the parking lot and we watched the sign go up, and he cried because his dad, who had to have multiple jobs when he was growing up, one of which, because he being Mexican in Utah, was probably not the coolest thing. But, my grandfather picked fruit, during the summer with my dad, and they would sit in the back of the truck, and he would, talk about the fact that someday they'll own a company. And that was the day when the sign went up. My dad got to see his name, Cardenas, go up on a building. And so you're working in a place that is the first of a generation. And we want to make a difference, not only in the community, not only in this area, in this region, but in the whole entire industry and in the world, of a standard that people can rely on. And then I would tell them a story about somebody who had started with us and helped to be able to build the culture and things like that. And it has to become something that is compelling, it's clear, and it'll create a desire to not only uphold it, but to grow it and have it become their story. So the culture of your organization is one of the most powerful and fragile powers behind your brand. So it is imperative to protect it at all cost, first through the onboarding process, and then through constant, uninhibited communication that will break down all walls. Culture is not just a bunch of placards that are on the wall. Culture is something that's living and breathing, so it not constantly needs to be improved. And how can that be? Is when we give people the empowerment to be able to make mistakes, innovate, and then have the ability to adapt immediately. But we also got to understand that people have to feel a certain way. That's the vibe. They have to understand the processes and procedures or the systems. They have to understand the productivity. They have to be involved in all those things. That creates the innovation and the freedom to innovate, and also the ability to adapt immediately. You see, the onboarding process, let me see in this, through the onboarding process, you will set the vibe, right? You will communicate the systems, and you will give you the freedom to focus on the most valuable and profitable part of any business, which is the people inside. And this is a thing that I failed at times, and I learned through experience, was when you love the system and you manage the people, every person in your organization will have an expiration date. But when you flip that on its head and you love the people and you simply manage the systems, which are nothing more than a list of the screw-ups of the imperfect people that are inside of your culture and your organization that have been given the permission to innovate, to try things new, to have the freedom to be able to do that, it fosters a mentality and a spirit of adaptability, and that's how you stay fresh. So as I looked at this, it was funny because 93% of challenges in companies and organizations stem from onboarding, and 99% of those can be tracked back to communication. My mama was right. What starts out right ends up right. I think that she just wanted me to experience the messy middle of honoring, improving, protecting, and communicating the culture for myself. So I invite you today, stop and take a breath. First of all, actually take 3 of them. It'll slow you down. Go for a walk. Maybe it's on your lunch hour. Maybe it's before work. And I want you to evaluate your onboarding process. And I want you to go back through this. I want you to listen to this again. And I want you to go through and I want you to evaluate your onboarding process and ask yourself, does my onboarding process set people up to have the type of victories that they want to have, and give the type of career path, and give them the hope and give them the faith in our brand that we ultimately want? And if not, simply ask the questions, what inside your organization, what do you think would be great as in an onboarding process? And what I would suggest is, honestly, when you stop and you take that breath, you evaluate your onboarding process. I would beg and plead, because your culture depends on it. And if you get frustrated this week because of something that happens inside the culture, whether it be a system that wasn't followed, it was a procedure that wasn't followed, it was an attitude, I want you to stop. And before you go at somebody, I want you to look at your onboarding process. And if you haven't effectively communicated it in the onboarding process, you cannot hold anyone accountable to it. And I'll finish with this. As my pops told me, there's 3 parts of communication: sender, receiver, results. And it's never the receiver's fault. It's always the sender. A lot of times we say that I told them, but what language did you tell them in, and did they understand it? And in the onboarding process, we can start to circumvent some of those challenges. This has been another episode of Inchstones. I appreciate you. And if you want more on this, grab the book, The Vibe. It's in the link in the bio. It's a short read. It's about 117 pages, and it takes you through. It's not theory. It's what we lived, and how we were able to build a multi-million-dollar company that was a national brand, and end up selling that and moving on from that. But I tell you, it's an absolute blueprint for every entrepreneur, every business owner to be able to look. And there's 5 major indicators that are powered by one thing: your culture, your process and procedure, your productivity, your innovation, your ability to adapt immediately, that are all powered by the vibe, which is not the energy that you bring into the room, but the way that you feel, the way that people feel when you leave. I hope you have a phenomenal day. My name is Kelly Cardenas, and I'm officially off the hot seat. Peace, love, and soul.
Nothing more on my mind. I got to shine, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never known, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.